Alright, in this video we're going to talk about sales tax and tips, or gratuity as it's sometimes called. This is one of those topics that is very real world. It's something that literally maybe you if you're out buying stuff with your own money, but definitely your parents, they're doing this every single day. So this is one of those topics where if you really can understand how it works and what you can do with it, you can make informed decisions for maybe future purchase decisions, even something small, or if it was something really big. You can maybe take part in a conversation with your parents with this type of stuff and really feel like that you're starting to learn how adults take care of business sometimes. All right, so now we're going to use everything we've used with percentages when we do this, because sales tax and tips, they're based off of percentages of an amount. That amount could be like the sale price or the whatever the tag price could be. Let's say sales tax. It could be the price tag on the item. You'll pay tax on that. So anyways, for both these, we're using our percentage skills. So that's what we want you to focus on, okay? So don't think it's a separate topic. It's using what we've already done. If you take a look at the definition, it's kind of sales tax, like we already said. If you don't know, it's a percent of the purchase price and is an amount paid in addition to the purchase price. Use your common sense. Sales tax. When you go to pay at the register, they're not going to take off money for sales tax. No. That's something you have to pay on top of buying an item. It's a way that our government generates revenue for whatever it does. But that's another conversation. Just make sure you know what it is. Now, a tip or gratuity, that's usually an amount of money that you give someone for some kind of service. Like maybe a valet driver who's parking your car. Maybe a waiter who's waiting on you in a restaurant. It could even be sometimes for tradesmen, men who come and do work. Maybe they built something for you, or landscaper, stuff like that. I don't know. It's based on whatever your lifestyle is like. So you tip certain people for certain things. So make sure you know what's reasonable and how to calculate it. So let's take a look at this example. And when we do this, we're going to do two methods before I even start. Method number one and method number two. Right off the bat, before I even say anything, I'm going to tell you, method number two is going to be faster. And it's going to be using your ability to maybe combine a step or two to help you truly understand how percents work. And method number two is going to use percentages more than 100%. So I'm already going to make a note of that. Uses percentages more than 100%. So if you're not comfortable using percentages more than 100%, then maybe this one might not be the method for you. But maybe it'll be that moment for you to break through and understand having something more than the original. Uses percentages more than 100%. Okay. All right, so now in this example it says, so we're talking soccer. Find the total cost of a $17.75 soccer ball if the sales tax is 6%. Here in Florida it's 7%. But we'll go ahead and make it 6% in this example. Let's say it's 6%. So now, as we work through this, the method number one is the step-by-step way that might make more sense for you. So here's what you're going to do. You go up to the register and you've got nothing but your soccer ball. The price tag says $17.75. They ring it up and the register says $17.75. And then they ring in no more items. They hit grand total checkout. It's now going to calculate a sales tax, a percentage of that purchase price. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to find what is 6% of $17.75. And so if you multiply those together and you do your 6%, so 0.06 times $17.75, so 17.75, that gives you, they rounded, but I'm going to give you the precise answer for a moment so we can also mention how to round. Precisely that equals 1.065. Now, remember, we're talking money, so in the store, they're going to round to the nearest penny, generally. So this is 6 pennies. That's $1.06. That's how much tax they're going to add to your price of $17.75. Except, you'll notice, there's this partial penny over here. They're generally going to round to the nearest penny, and so because that's a 5 or higher, we're going to round up this penny, and that's why it becomes $1.07. That's why you see this is $1.07 and this is $1.06.5. They're rounding up that half cent because you can't really have half a cent. So that tells you your sales tax that you're going to pay is $1.07. Now, using your common sense, we know that sales tax is going to add to your cost. So if you take your $17.75, now add on the $1.07 of tax you calculated, add them together, and you now know $18.82. You are going to spend a grand total at the register $18.82. That's how much money they're going to take from you. And so that's method number one. Find the amount of the tax and then add it to the purchase price. That's method number one. Method number two, I already told you it's going to be faster and it's going to use percentages more than 100. What I mean by that is this. Method number two, you know that you're already going to pay for 100% of the purchase price because you're definitely paying the $17.75. So I'm going to label that. You're already paying the $17.75. So you're paying 100% of that, which means you're giving them $17.75. 100% represents all of your the price tag, $17.75. You now also know that you're going to be paying an additional 6% sales tax. So that means you're paying your $17.75, your 100%, plus your 6% tax. So grand total, you're paying 106% of the purchase price of the soccer ball. You're paying the 100% for the soccer ball plus the 6% for the tax. That's what you're doing here. And so now 106%. Well, hey, we can work with that. We know how to find what is 106% of $17.75. And we do that by multiplying, by turning it into a decimal first. So 106%, if there's no, I'll do it right up here, if there's no decimal being mentioned, that means it's after the 6. So if you move it over twice, remember, going from, as a brief reminder, I know my ABCs, A, B, C, D, skip, P, Q, R, S, etc. To go from a percent to a decimal, just like the ABCs, we go to the left. So that means you're moving your decimal place to the left. That's what that tells us. So remember that. Going from a percent to a decimal, move to the left 2 times. So that becomes 1.06. And that's what you see them doing down here. They're going to do 106% of $17.75. That means 1.06 times $17.75. And that approximately rounds to $18.82. When technically we know it was $18.81.5 because we learned over here it was half a cent. But that's neither here nor there. Just it gets you straight to your answer. And then you would have rounded to the nearest penny. So $18.82. So I want you guys to see, I took some time to explain the FAFSA method because you're making some connections. But if you can understand that 100% of the sales price plus 6% for the tax, you're paying a grand total of 106%. So now let's use your percentage skills. What is 106% of $17.75? And you found out it's $1. Okay, so that's 1.06 times it. It automatically gives you the total. It doesn't give you the sales price. It automatically adds it on because it was that 0.06 that you had on top of the 100%, the 1. So because it was already included, it gives you the grand total. There's no need to add it together like we did on the left in the first method. So that was the faster way of doing sales tax. And for tips, it is exactly the same thing for tips. But whatever your percentage of your tip goes here. Or same thing here, if you're doing method number 1. If it was a tip and you're tipping 15% or 20%, this would just be a 15% or a 20%. You would get your number, you would get your how much that tip is going to be, and then you would add it together, just like here. And so we'll do an example of doing that, and then we'll do a few guided examples. All right, so let's take a look at this example. In this example, we're talking about a tip instead of a sales tax. And as a note, oh, excuse me one second. Sorry for that interruption. As a note, I want you to know if you had a problem that included sales tax and your tip, you're going to do the sales tax first because that's going to give you your grand total with the restaurant, and then you would calculate your tip on top of that. So just as you know, in the future, whether it be in real life or being one of these problems, do sales tax first, and then figure out what your tip is. That's generally how it's worked out. So now, unless a question told you specifically otherwise, or maybe you're with someone who chose to do something specifically differently, but that's neither here nor there, that's their decision. But in general, tax first, then tip, if it's a situation where you're tipping and you already paid tax. All right, so let's see. In this example, we're talking about a customer wants to leave a 15% tip on a bill for $18.50 at a restaurant. What will be the total bill with tip? So we're wanting to be precise here. Maybe it's a credit card receipt and you want to take time to make it precise. You know you want to leave. Sure, you can round and estimate, but maybe you'd like being exactly precise, or for whatever reason. Let's just make sure we know what we're leaving. So now, what you can do is method 1 is first find what is 15% of $18.50. So 0.15. Remember that's 15% as a decimal, 0.15. If you don't remember how to go from percent to decimal, remember you go to the you're going to go to the left, and you're going to go always 2 spaces. Multiply that to 1850. That tells you $2.78 for tip. So you take that $2.78 and you add it to the original 1850 to tell you your grand total that you're out the door with is $21.28. So that's going to be your total cost. Now in method number 2, remember this is a faster one. By the way, this method only finds you grand totals. I didn't mention that earlier. Method number 2 goes straight to your final total. So be aware of that. If you have a question that says, well, what was the tip amount or what was the sales tax amount, you're going to need to use method number 1, but you'll just do the first step of it. If it said, what was the tip or what was the sales tax, you're just going to get this far to say what was the amount. So anyways, method 2 goes straight to final total, meaning after you paid your tax, after you paid your tip, whatever. So now in this example, we already said it's 15%. We know 100% already. We're already paying 100% of the 1850 because we have to pay the 1850. So we're at least going to spend 100%. That's what we know. So we know we're at least spending 1850. Additionally, this 15%, well, that's our tip. So now we're paying 100% and another 15%. So grand total, we're paying 115%. So now if you just multiply or find what is 115% of 1850, you're good to go. So just move that decimal over twice. So it becomes 1.15. Multiply that by 1850 and you find out on the money $21.28. Excuse me. Choose that example. That interruption. So now you see $21.28. That's going to be your grand total that you're going to be spending if you take the time to calculate your tip precisely and add it on. And notice, same answer as what we got over here, but this method goes straight to the grand total. And so questions where it's once you go straight to the grand total and you're trying to do as fast as possible or maybe with as least amount of work as possible, you're going to use this technique. You're going to want to make 100%, increase it past 100%, and then just find out what is 115% of that amount of your purchase price. Now, if this had been a 20% tip situation, for example, I personally tend to, if the servers, everything's good, I generally will tip 20% on my bill. And if that were the case, you calculate that by, this would just be a 20% instead, which means this is going to be 120% instead. And so when you got down here for the calculation, this would be 1.20 or 1.2 times your total, and that would give you a slightly higher amount because you're paying a higher percentage for your tip. So if the tip amount's different, that's how it's going to affect your answer. It's going to show up here, it's going to show up there, and here this would be 1.2, and then you would have obviously a slightly higher answer. So keep that in mind. So now we're going to do a few examples. I want you to first hit pause and try them on your own first and see if you can do them on your own. And if you can, hit pause, try it, and then hit play and check yourself. Make sure you know you're ready. Take that time to prove to yourself and to maybe your parents if they're wanting you to do it. Take the time to know that you're ready because really it's benefiting you, not them. Take the time to know that you're ready instead of thinking that you're ready. All right, so we'll do 4 quick examples, 2 of a tax, 2 of a tip, and then we'll maybe do a couple word problems, maybe 1 word problem, then we'll be all done. So bunches of examples. So hit pause if you think you've got these examples, and then hit play to check yourself. Take the time to try it yourself first. That way you don't assume, oh, I got this. Take the time to make sure you know you got this. That's the confidence we're talking about. That confidence translates into better performance. All right, so let's start with number 5 at the top. Hit pause if you've not done so already. Now for each of these, I'm going to start off, I'll do the first one using both methods, but after that I'm going to move forward with just using method number 2 because it tends to be faster and has less steps. So I'll do both methods for this first question, so please forgive me if it takes a little bit longer to explain it, but after that I'm just going to use just the faster method number 2 so we can breeze right through these questions. So now in question number 5, and really for us this would be kind of example number 3, $115 coat, 7% tax. I chose these questions because they represent what we have in the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, we have 7% sales tax. So this seems more down to earth, more home based, not that 6% nonsense we did in example number 1. So now method number 1, I'm just going to call it method 1. Remember that was find the amount of tax first and then add that to your total and then have your grand total. So that's what we're going to do. We got to find what is 7% of 115. So 7% is going to be our percentage. 115 is going to be like our of number or our whole number, as you heard us describe it in other videos. So 7% as a decimal. The decimal is currently after the 7, so when we move it twice, it's going to be 0.07. So 0.07. We're going to multiply that by 115, since that's our whole, that's our total price. That is our entire amount. So $115. So now when we multiply these together and get that answer, that's going to tell us how much sales tax are we paying. That's what that tells us. So 0.07 times 115. That tells me $8.05. That's what that tells me. And it comes out to exactly, no rounding necessary, 8.05. Since we're talking money, $8.05. So now you're going to take your original purchase price of 115 and you're going to add to it $8.05. And that will tell you your grand total. So add those together, whether it be calculator or by hand. At this point, I'm worried about the problem solving, not your arithmetic. That comes out to 123.05. We're talking money, so that means $123.05. That is your grand total at the register out the door. So that's method number 1. We found the tax amount, how much tax. So tax amount, and that is right here. We then added it to the the price tag, and then that was our grand total at the register. That's what they're going to charge us. Now I'm going to go ahead and do method number 2 for this question, and then I'm going to do the next example with just method number 2. Because I want you guys to know they both always work, but method number 2 is just going to save you a little bit more time. So now method number 2 tells us we already know that we're going to pay 100% of 115, meaning we already know we're going to pay at least $115, but we now know we're going to pay an additional 7%. So method number 2 tells us, first let me title it real fast, tells us that we're going to be paying a grand total of 107%. That's what that tells us. We're spending a total of 107%. So that tells me I need to know what is 107% of the original price tag of the $115. And so I'll even put in blue to keep the same color coding going. So of the $115. So what you're going to do is use your percentage skills. We're going to move that decimal that's after the 7, move it over twice, so it becomes 1.07. So we're going to multiply 1.07. We're going to multiply that by the price tag, $115, and that's going to give us our grand total already out the door. So we skip that step of adding them together. So 1.07 times 115 gives us, without any rounding necessary, $123.05. And you'll notice, obviously, well maybe not obviously, but that was the exact same answer we got with method number 1. So method number 2 goes straight to the grand total, but then when the question's asking for your grand total, that's perfectly fine. Method number 2 is a little bit faster. It just requires you to know you're paying 100% for the $115 code, because you're already going to pay at least $115, but now you're paying an additional 7% tax. So just be comfortable, try to practice being comfortable with using percentages more than 100. I know sometimes that confuses us. We're used to it always being a piece of the whole, but in this case, 107%, that's more than the whole. I mean, that's more than the entire pie, because it's more than all of it. Okay, so now if you haven't done so already, hit pause and try question number 7. Now I'm just going to go ahead and go through and do that using method number 2, where I'm going to jump straight to making it more than 100% and just going to multiply it right away. So take the time to make sure you know how to set it up, meaning what are you writing, what are you multiplying by. Okay, so we see it's 7% sales tax, so that means it's going to be 107% again, because it's 100% for this plus 7% for that. So that means we're looking for what is 107% of $299 for the DVD player. So $299. So convert that to a decimal we can use. So that means we were working with 1.07 multiplied by 299. Now use your calculator. You don't have to do this by hand. And then just round to the nearest cent, because that's what the store is going to do. Times 299. And that tells us no rounding was necessary. I'll put a dollar sign so we're talking money. $319.93. That's going to be your grand total out the door when you go to pay for this item at the register. So that was 2 examples of calculating tax. Now again, if this tax amount had not been 7%, we simply would have just not had 107%. If it was a 6% tax, this would be 106%. If it was, I don't know, God forbid, an 11% tax, this would be 111%. So you can use it for any amount where you're adding to the original, and it's exactly the same for a tip, and that's what you're about to see. We're gonna do 2 tip examples, and then we'll maybe do, and I'm gonna do them the fast way using method number 2, and then we're going to maybe do a word problem or 2, and then we're gonna be all done. So remember, hit pause before I do those examples. All right, and the next 2 examples will be calculating tips instead of tax. Let's say you're tipping on service you received. So in this example, and by the way, it's the exact same thing. So in this example, you had a $15 lunch, and you decided to leave a 20% tip. I mentioned earlier, that's generally what I leave for meals if everything was on par. So jumping right to the point, that means you're spending a grand total of 120%. So we're going to convert that to a decimal, and we're going to multiply, remember the decimal's at the end if it's not there, we're going to multiply that by $15. So I'm going to just go ahead and go right to that. That's 1.2 or 1.20. It means the exact same thing. So times $15, and that'll give you your grand total. And that tells you $18. So your grand total, including your tip, is going to be $18. So take a moment to make sure you think about what you did. Now, without getting into too much detail, there is a way to mentally do some of these problems, especially when it's multiples of 10. It makes it even definitely easy. You could have found in your head what is 10% of 15 and just doubled it. So 10% of 15 is just essentially move the decimal over once. So 1.5 or $1.50. So $1.50 is 10% of 15. So if you're out and about, and maybe it's an easy percentage like this, you could say, okay, if $1.50 is 10% of $15, I need 20%. I'm just going to double $1.50. Well, doubling $1.50 is $3. So you would know the tip amount would be $3. So then $3 plus $15, well, that's the $18 total we got down here. So some of these do work out mentally. I'm going to go to the next example. Remember, hit pause and try it first on your own. All right, take a moment to try this one. Hit pause and see how you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause, just set it up. All right, so now in this example, you'll see we were dealing with 115% because we're dealing 100% plus a 15%. So that turns into 1.15. So that's the magic decimal that you're going to use in this question. You're going to do 1.15 times 16. And so that comes out to $18.40. So, or 18.4 is what it says, but that means at 40 cents. So $18.40. That's going to be your grand total for that haircut at this hair salon if you're including a 15% tip. Now, briefly, before I move on and do a couple word problems and call it quits, I want to remind you to make sure when you're doing these that your answers are reasonable. Now, you could always go back and go back to method number 1 and take your time and step by step find what is 15% of $16, meaning 0.15 times 16. And you would find out what was that, and I believe you'd get $2.40. Now, once you knew that, you could then add that to the $16 and get your $18.40. So you can always go back and do it that way. Additionally, let's make sure your answer is reasonable. I think you guys will agree, 15% of 16, well, that's less than half, and in fact, that's less than 1/4. And 1/4 of 16 is $4, so this is less than that. So that means we have less than a $4 tip. So reasonably, if we know it's less than a $4 tip, that means $4 plus 16, that means it's got to be less than $20. So reasonably, your answer needs to be somewhere between $20, and obviously it's not going to be less than $16 because it's not going to be a discount. It's you adding to your cost. So reasonably, make sure that your answers, if you lost track of the decimal place or you did something funny, maybe you did 115 times 16, that would give you a giant answer. That would give you $1,840. Well, that's an expensive haircut. That's not reasonable. So take the time to make sure that your answers are reasonable, and that's a great way to already have perspective of 1, what to expect, but 2, give yourself confidence that you know you did it correctly. Okay, so this is going to be our last example. We'll just do one word problem where it's using both, and it's using what I mentioned earlier. We're going to have sales tax and a tip in this example, so it's a bit more realistic in that regard. So in this example, it says it's all about a catered dinner. The Stryton family had a meal catered for a wedding rehearsal dinner. The cost of the dinner was $476. There was a 5% sales tax, and they left a 15% tip. What was the total cost, including the sales tax and the tip? They're kind of implying do the sales tax first and then do the tip. But that's kind of what I said earlier. You usually tip off the final total after tax. So that's what we're doing here. So in this process, we're going to first add on the 5% sales tax, and then we're going to add on the 15% tip. Now you can do this step by step, and you could do method number 1 and find out what is 5% of this. That'll tell you just the sales tax amount. Then you can add it on. Or maybe the question could say, how much sales tax are they paying? In that regard, you wouldn't use method number 2, you would use method number 1. Or you could do 15% of that total that you get after you add the 5%. So that's what we're going to do. And so I'm going to use method number 2 for both steps of this because it'll be the least amount of work to help us do it. So hit pause if you have not done so already and try this question on your own. Alright, so now we know it's 5% sales tax, so adding that to the already 100% of 476, that knows we're dealing with 105%. So we're going to turn that to a decimal, and then we're going to multiply it by 476. Don't forget, if there is no decimal, it's at the very end, okay? So now move it twice to the left, always to the left, so we're at 1.05. So that's what we're dealing with. So we're going to calculate 1.05, we're going to multiply that by the $476, and that's going to tell us the amount, the total before the tip. That's what that's going to give us, because we haven't done the tip yet. So go ahead and multiply these together. 1.05 times 476. That tells us as of now our total is, this is before your tip, remember that, we haven't done the tip yet. That's no rounding necessary at this point, 499.8. So that means $499.80. That's what we're working with right now. That is our amount before the tip. So I'll even label that to remind you. This is before the tip. Maybe the question asked that, what was your total before the tip? That was before you left your tip. Now we're leaving a 15% tip. So we already know we're paying 100% of $499.80, but now we're paying another 15%. So that means grand total we're paying 115%, is what we're about to do in addition to that. So move that decimal over 2 times, same thing. So that means 1.15 is what we're working with now. So that tells us 1.15. We're going to multiply that now by the total before the tip, the $499.80. That's what we're multiplying that by. So the $499.80. So this number came directly from right there. We're just saying, okay, now what is that plus another 15%? So multiply these together using whatever means you're using. 1.15 times 499.8, or 0.80 means the same thing. And that tells us a grand total of, I'll put a dollar sign so we're talking money, $574, that's an ugly 4, and 77 cents. There was no rounding necessary in this question, so that was nice. So that's just one less thing. And if there was rounding, just round to the nearest whole penny each time you get to a step. So that tells us our total cost, including the sales tax and the tip, is going to be $574.77. Just make sure you did it step by step. You found out what was the total before your tip by just adding on the 5%, and then you got to add on another 15% on top of that new total. Add another 15%, and then that will give you your grand total, what you paid at that restaurant before you left. All right, guys. For each of these questions, just don't forget to make sure your answers are reasonable. Use the skills we talked about in the other percent sections where we talked about how to find percents of numbers. This essentially was using skills from the beginning of chapter 6 when we talked about how to find the is number, like what is 6% of, I don't know, 230, looking for that piece of the pie. That's what this kind of was. Find that piece, find that 5%, and then add it onto your total and then get your new total. So it's using the very basic, looking for the piece of the whole, looking for the is number. This is what we're essentially doing for each of these, and then just add it on. Or if you want to get fancy, you want to do it faster, method number 2 was telling us, go ahead and do it all as one multiplication operation to do it all at once to get your new grand total. And then we did it again to get our new grand total. So take your time, make sure your answers are reasonable, and be careful with rounding. It'd be silly to get a question wrong because maybe you rounded incorrectly. And for rounding purposes, you shouldn't need to round until the very final answer. Good luck, guys. I hope this helped.